When I was growing up, I remember as a kid, some of the adults, maybe a teacher, telling me or telling some of my other classmates that you have the attention span of a goldfish. And that was not meant to be a compliment. You know, they said, you just can't pay attention. What's wrong with you? I'm just trying to teach this lesson to you. Or why can't you behave, just for longer than a few seconds? You have an attention span shorter than a goldfish. Goldfish, by the way, scientists have determined they have this attention span of 9 seconds. They can focus on something for 9 seconds, and then they lose their focus, and they're off on something else. But scientists have actually recently found that humans have surpassed them, that the human attention span is now at 8 seconds. Humans now have 1 second shorter attention span than goldfish have. And it didn't used to be this way. In fact, they've looked at previous studies, and they found that in the year 2000, which was kind of the dawn of the digital age, the human average attention span was 12 seconds. And yet, in a span of 13 or so years, they've found that our attention span has plummeted by at least by 25%, down to 8 seconds. And now we're trailing goldfish in our ability to focus and our ability to pay attention. Now, people wonder, why is this the case? What happened? What changed? And a lot of people have a lot of different theories. Some people think that it's because of movies and TV shows. I don't know if you've noticed or paid attention or pulled out your stopwatch the last time you were watching your favorite TV show, but directors of movies and TV shows never let a camera angle last longer than 7 seconds. Every 7 seconds or less, they change the camera angle. It doesn't matter if there's a character that's giving like a minute-long monologue or speech. They will change the camera angle, to zoom in, or change it from a high angle or a low angle, or they'll turn it out to look at the reaction shot of the person or people they're speaking to. Every 7 seconds or less, the angle shifts. And I know movies and TV shows have been around since much longer than the year 2000, but it seems that in this digital age, there seems to be more content created, not just, the 3 major networks anymore. Now you got, tons of channels and all their kinds of content to look at, and you get a lot of easier access to them. So a lot of more TV shows and movies are being watched and consumed than before, which leads to the next culprit or item that a lot of people, the majority of people think is to blame for our shortened attention spans, which is smartphones. They think since the year 2000 and the proliferation of smartphones, our attention span has plummeted because we don't need to focus anymore. Anything we want, if we get bored, we can simply just look at that screen that is attached to the end of our arm and find every entertainment that we need. If a thought comes into our mind as someone else is talking, we don't have to wait for them to finish and wait to go home to our computer or wait to go to the library to look up. We can, have that question. We can easily open our phone and look at Google and find the answer. We get text alerts. We get all these messages that are calling for our attention. And so having these smartphones at the ready has really diminished our ability to focus and to concentrate for long periods of time. And so with this diminished ability for humanity to focus and to concentrate and to pay attention, it's no wonder that services like Twitter are so popular. Because we don't have time to read the whole article. We don't have time to even read the whole headline. We have time to read 140 characters. That's it, 140 letters, and that's all I really need to know. That's all I really have time to invest in, because I got to go on to see what else is out there, to see what other information, to turn my attention to something else. And not just Twitter, you have the rise of Vine. It's no longer, we don't have time to watch a whole movie or a whole TV show, not even a whole YouTube clip at one time. Vine, this is 6 seconds or less. Entertain me in 6 seconds, or else, I'm turning the channel. I got other things to do. Our attention spans are plummeting. We don't have attention spans anymore. People say, I don't have a short attention span. I just, look, a squirrel, right? Very distracted, very easily distracted nowadays. As we come to Mark, our area of our gospel, our biblical book of emphasis for the past 12 weeks, as I've talked about, and hopefully you've heard this before and kind of starting to understand the fact that Mark has been called the gospel for the ADD generation for a reason. It's a short gospel. It's action-packed. And today, what we're going to focus on as we look to Mark chapter 12, we're going to find that Jesus even compacts it even more. He summarizes things even more. It's like a tailor-made message for our short attention span society. Mark chapter 12, we're going to look at the command. Earlier in the book of Mark, chapter 12, Jesus again is getting into this conflict with the Pharisees, with the religious leaders, the Sadducees. And this isn't a surprise, this is a theme. You've probably picked up on this as we've gone through Mark, as you've read through the other Gospels, that there's always this tension between Jesus and the religious leaders of his day, and they're always trying to trap him, they're always trying to trick him, they're always trying to undermine him or ruin him. And Mark chapter 12 is no different. They come to Jesus, and then there's this conflict, there's this confrontation. And this is kind of what's going on in the context as we come to the passage that we're studying this morning. Mark chapter 12, starting with verse 28. Mark 12:28, it says this, that one of the teachers of the law came and heard Jesus arguing with the Sadducees. Seeing that Jesus gave good answers to their questions, he asked Jesus, which of the commands is most important? Here, this teacher of the law, this expert of the law, comes to hear Jesus. Maybe this is for the first time. I don't know. Maybe he had just, up to this point, he had only heard the slanted reports of his colleagues, of his peers, talking about this crazy Jesus fellow that's trying to do away with their way of life, that's trying to change the system. And maybe he had come with some presuppositions, some other ideas of who Jesus was and what Jesus was about. But he gets there, and he sees Jesus, and he hears Jesus, and he hears this conflict and this interchange, this exchange between Jesus and the Sadducees. And he realizes something is different about Jesus. He sees that Jesus isn't giving some crazy, weird, off-the-wall answers. Something responds to Jesus' answers in his heart, and he sees and he understands that what Jesus is saying is good. And so he looks at Jesus and he says, which of the commands is the most important? If maybe this inkling that I have that there's something different about this man is right, let's see what he says to this question. Of all of the commands, which is the most important? Now, a lot of times when we read this passage, people might think that we're talking about the famous commandments, the 10 famous commandments. But this is not exactly what this teacher of the law is referring to. I mean, he's an expert of the law. He's a teacher of the law. Some of your translations call him a scribe. And so he wasn't just concerned with the 10 big ones. See, back in Jesus' day, they actually had more than 10 commands. They had 613 commands. This was what the Old Testament talked about. These were all of the commands that they found that Moses had given them, that the Old Testament had given them. And this was 613 commands that they had to know, that they had to be aware of, that they had to follow. This was a lot for them to do. This was a lot of knowledge. This was a lot of rules. This was a lot of stuff that was weighing them down. And so the scribe, this expert of the law, says, which of these 613 is the most important? This is a lot of stuff. Can you cut through the baggage? Can you condense? If there's one command that is more important than the other 112, tell me what it is. Tell us what it is, because this 613 is just too much. We don't have the time or the attention to be able to really live up to all 100 or 613 of these every day of our life. What is the most important command? And Jesus looks at this scribe. He looks at this expert, this teacher of the law. And you know, if you've been paying attention, if you've been reading through this Gospel of Mark, that a lot of times when Jesus is asked a question, a somewhat tricky question, does he usually give them a direct response? No, he responds with his own question. But this time, maybe Jesus sees that this man is not really trying to trick him. Maybe he sees that there's something with this teacher of the law that is a genuinely seeking the truth. And so he gives this man a direct answer. I don't think it was the answer maybe that the man was looking for, that the people were expecting, but he says this in verse 29. He said, "The most important command is this: listen, people of Israel, the Lord our God is the only Lord. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength." This response that Jesus gave to the scribe wasn't something new. It wasn't something that Jesus kind of made up off the top of his head. This was a very well-known passage from the Old Testament. If you've paid attention and you've come to see that Jesus, in his responses, in his teachings, would often quote Old Testament scriptures. And this was no different. In fact, this passage particular was really well known to the Jews and continues to be really well known to Jews. And it's referred to as the Shema, which is the Hebrew word for listen or hear, that starts off, that passage from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 to 5 that we read earlier today. Hear, O Israel, listen, O Israel, the Shema. This is a really important passage because it's a prayer for the Israelites, for the Jews. It's kind of like how many Christians today can say the Lord's Prayer off the top of their head, that a lot of us memorize that and know that prayer really well. This was kind of like their version of the Lord's Prayer to some extent, because this was the prayer, this was the passage of Scripture that the Jews would say, that would repeat. We would pray every morning when they would wake up. This is how they would begin their day. Hear, O Israel, that the Lord our God is one. They would begin their days with it, and not just begin their day. They would teach their children that this would be the last thing for them to say as they got tucked into bed at night. This was the first thing they would say in the morning, and the last thing they would say at night. They would begin their day, end their day with the Shema. And not just that, there are many Jews that have been known to utter the Shema with their last breath. Their final words in this life are the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. Love the Lord with all your heart and your soul and your mind and your strength. This was a very significant thing to the Jews, and it continues to be significant to Jews today. But this brings us to our first remarkable point this morning, which is, with God, it is all or nothing. We cannot partially love him. See, as you read through this quote that Jesus quoted there from Deuteronomy, there's one word that gets repeated throughout this passage. All, 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 all. Jesus says we have to love the Lord our God with all of our hearts, with all of our souls, with all of our minds, with all of our strength. He doesn't say, oh, you know what? Yeah, you should love the God with most of your heart and with some of your soul and with a part of your mind and most of your strength. That's not what Jesus says. That's not what Deuteronomy says. Jesus is saying you have to love God with all of these components. Not part, not some, all. Now, I know words have kind of changed meanings and in passages of time, and some things have kind of changed. Our concepts of some of these words have changed since the 2,000 years when Jesus spoke them, and the 6,000 years or so since they were written in Deuteronomy. But to give you an understanding of what Jesus was talking about, the heart, what does it mean? What did it mean in that context for the Jews to hear these words, to love God with all your heart? Well, the heart to them, and we'll see some overlap, but the heart to them was the control center of emotions, of passion, of desire, and of your plans. When you wanted something, when you desired something, when you were passionate about something, that would inform your plans, right? If you wanted something, you would plan to obtain it or to seek it or to go after it. And that was the center, that the kind of the control center was located in your heart. And I think we can kind of relate to that extent. We still feel that the passions, emanate from our heart. But this is what Jesus was saying, that we have to love God with all of our passion, with all of our desire, with all of our heart. This is the control center. This is the core of our being. And this is all to be devoted in love to God. Now, sometimes I think Christians and maybe in particular Seventh-day Adventists get a hang-up when it comes to loving God with our emotions. A lot of times I think, maybe not this present church or our present company excluded, but a lot of times we can think that, following God is really just a knowledge thing. I need to know the truth. I need to understand prophecy. I need to have these dates and these truths and these things memorized and ingrained in my mind. And that's true, and we'll get to that. But that's not all that comes with being in a relationship with someone, right? I mean, if you're trying to woo someone to maybe become a boyfriend, girlfriend, or a fiance, and you said, will you marry me? Because I know your favorite color is blue, and I know that you like petunias, and I think your favorite food is Greek, and be still my beating heart, right? Like, there's more to it than that. There's more to it than just a knowledge. There's an emotion. There's a passion that comes in a relationship. And it doesn't matter if it's a romantic relationship or a friend relationship. There's emotions that are involved. And having a relationship with God is no different. Jesus says you have to love God with all of our hearts. It has to be an emotional component to this. And not just part of your emotions, not just part of your desires, but your full, complete heart. All of your desires are to be poured out in love for God. He also says to love God with all your soul. And what does that mean? I know in our modern day, we kind of have this actually wrong idea of what a soul is, kind of influenced by the Greeks, this eternal soul that goes to heaven when we die and that kind of thing. But that's not at all what Jesus was talking about here. This is not what the Hebrews believed. This was not what Deuteronomy was talking about. The soul in that context was the people's motivating or willpower that helps determine their conduct. The soul was kind of like if the emotions were the engine of a car, the soul was the gas that kind of got things going. You had the emotions and you would make your plans, but you can make all the plans in the world. If you don't follow through with them, what are they going to amount to, right? And so the soul was that motivation. It was that willpower that the Jews had to follow their heart, to put those plans into motion. And I think today in Christianity, this is something that really isn't talked about. The whole concept of soul, or rather, I should say, the concept of willpower kind of goes out the window. We think, we talked about this last Sabbath. I can just show up to church and ask for forgiveness, and then, I'll be safe as long as I'm in these four walls, and I can go and, I know I don't live like I should the rest of the 6 days, but you know what? It doesn't matter because, I go to church, or I know the Lord's Prayer, I do these things. But God is saying, no, that's not really what it's about. There's more to it than that. There's more. We bring stuff to the relationship. We have to bring something to the plate, right? Having willpower to follow through in that relationship is a very significant and important component to really following, to really loving God. We have to be able to harness that willpower and not just say, you know what, I don't know, I don't think that's, I know there's some stuff in my life that I should probably not do, or there's some things in my life that I probably should do, but I haven't done it before, and I don't really know. I'm just going to, if God wants me to do that, then he's just going to have to change me, and because I'm just going to keep living my life like I want. Now, don't get me wrong, God does have the power to change us. And there are going to be things that we have really hardly any power over. God doesn't expect us to perfect ourselves. This is not what I'm saying at all. But there are things that, when it comes to a relationship, that we have to do, right? You have to carve out time to spend with that person, with your friend, or with your spouse, or with your boyfriend or your girlfriend. You have to carve out time to spend with God, and it takes willpower. It takes willpower to come to church on Sabbath, when you would want to be out on the beach or out in the park or doing something else with your friends or with your family. It takes willpower to get up in the morning and to spend time reading your scripture and talking to God when you would rather be catching a few more minutes of sleep. It takes willpower for us to have a relationship with people, and it takes willpower for us to have that relationship with God. Does that make sense? This is what God is saying, what Jesus is saying, that you have to love God with all of your soul, with all of your motivation, with all of your willpower. Pour yourself in to this relationship with God. He says, love God with all of your mind. And this is our center of intelligence, which directs our opinions and judgments. And I think we understand that. That's kind of our modern concept of our brain. We learn things in our brain, and that's where we form our opinions based on the things that we know or don't know, and how we form our judgments of what's right and what's wrong. God says, love me with all of your mind. A lot of times we might think, especially for some reason, Christians have the reputation of being anti-science. We don't believe in science. None of that. That's just atheistic mumbo jumbo. We just need faith. God says no. Faith is an important component, but love God with your mind. Question me. Talk to me. Get to know me. Learn about me. Learn from me. Take time studying Scripture, not just reading it, but figuring out, learning what it means, finding some explanations, digging deep. Love me with all of your mind. And love God with all your strength. Our strength is our physical capacity, including our possessions. The strength is our ability to do things or to provide things in the Jewish context, in the Jewish mind. God says, love me with all of your ability to do, with all of your strength, with all of your ability to create, with all of your ability to donate, with all of your ability to give. Love me with all of your strength. And when you add these components together, your heart and your soul and your mind and your strength, that really makes up all of who we are as a person. And so Jesus is saying, love God with all of these components, because when you add it up, God is saying, love me with all that you are. Love me with your whole person. Love me with your whole being. I just can't take part of you. I just don't want part of you. Love me with all of you, who you are. With God, it is all or nothing. We cannot partially love him. We can't love him just with a part of our bodies, with a part of our minds. We have to love him completely. This is different than tithe. God says, give me 10% of your money. Give me a part of your money. God says, give me a part of your time. Come to worship on one day a week, on the 1/7 of your time. Give to me. These are our portions that God requests. These are portions of things that we can give to God. But here, this is different. God says, love me with all of who you are. No part. It's all or nothing. Love me with all of who you are. Jesus continues in verse 31, and he says, the second most important command is this: love your neighbor the same as you love yourself. These two commands are the most important. Jesus says, there you go. I've condensed the 613 down to something that you can tweet about now. You don't have to sit out typing all 613. There's two. They can easily fit on your Twitter feed. And this is our second remarkable point, that it is impossible to love God with our whole being and not love our neighbors. It is impossible to love God as he wants us to and not love our neighbors. See, Jesus says these two commands are the most important. Even though the scribe had asked for one command, Jesus couldn't do it. He said, I can't do it. I'm not going to be able to help you out there with one command because there's two commands that are the most important. There's command 1 and command 1b. They're kind of two sides of the same coin. You can't just have a coin with two heads on it or two tails. It's not going to be a valid coin. This coin, this command that you need, that you're asking for, has two sides, and it's love for God and love for people. And you cannot separate one from the other. There's two commands that equal the greatest command. And they both are centered in love. And they can't be separated because they're linked. This love for God and love for others is linked in a permanent, inseparable way. If you try to separate the two, if you only focus on loving God and you forget and neglect loving others, that's monasticism. You know, God doesn't call us to be monks, to be apart from the world, just to be out isolated. This is not what God wants for us to do as his followers. And if you separate loving God from loving other people and just focusing on loving other people, then that's secular humanism. And obviously, God doesn't want that either. He wants to have a relationship with us. He wants us to love him and for him to love us. He said, and this love for me and this love for others, you can't separate one from the other because then you get out of balance. Then things just start going haywire. Because love flows from one to the other. There's just this one constant current of love. And sometimes we try to put up a dam and block that current of love because we don't really like where it's going. And we ask that question, who is my neighbor? Okay, Jesus, I know you say love your neighbor, but who is my neighbor? Who are you talking about? And that's not a new question. It's a question that Jesus was asked during his ministry on earth. But the thing is, when we ask that question, it presupposes that there is an answer that we can find out of people who aren't our neighbors. If we're working to try to figure out who my neighbor is, it just shows that we're actually looking for a loophole. And we've been talking about that a few times in our study of Mark. Where we're trying to figure out, okay, so I know I need to love people, but just my neighbor, so who's my neighbor? Because I don't really want to love these other people. How can I get out of this, God? Who is my neighbor? I need a loophole here. But God says, if you read through Mark, if you read through the Gospels, if you read through the Bible, God is pretty clear that our neighbor is everyone else that shares the earth with us. And he's serious about that. He wasn't just making stuff up. Love your neighbor as yourself is very important to God. It is at that same level as loving him because when we love our neighbors as ourselves, it shows that we love God with all of our being. It's evidence that we have that full 100% commitment to God. Because it's kind of hard to show and to prove that you love God, right? I mean, what can you really do out there in the wilderness by yourself to prove that you love God? I mean, you can say it all you want, but I don't really know. But you can sure prove that you love other people. You can sure prove that you love your neighbor. And by showing your love toward your neighbor, you show that you've given yourself completely in love to God. God says, I want you to love your neighbor because it shows that you love me. Love your neighbor that's Democrat or Republican. And stop posting insulting stuff on Facebook about them. Seriously, folks. No one likes being insulted, no matter how strong your political convictions might be. Love them like you love yourself. I don't think you would like them insulting your political views. Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself. Love your Hindu or your atheist or your Muslim neighbor. And that means loving them by providing protection and shelter and refuge for them when they are in need. Just like you would hope that they would provide shelter and refuge and protection for you if you were fleeing for your life. Love your neighbor as yourself. It means to love that person that cuts you off as you're driving down the freeway. It means to love that person that is rude to you in the line in front of you in the grocery store. Give them the benefit of the doubt like you give yourself. Oh, I'm in a rush. I need to get over quickly. Oh, I'm in a rush. I need to jump ahead in this line. We give ourselves the benefit of the doubt all the time. Cut the same slack to others. Jesus says, love others like you love yourself. It is impossible to love God with our whole being and not love our neighbors. So the man answered in verse 32, "That was a good answer, teacher. You are right in saying that God is the only Lord and that there is no other God. And you must love God with all your heart, all your mind, all your strength. And you must love others the same as you love yourself. These commands are more important than all the animals and sacrifices we offer to God." Recently, Apple just announced their brand new iPhone 7. Every year they come out with a new iPhone. Every year the iPhone is a little different than the previous year. And this year, one of the major changes for the iPhone 7, anyone want to know what I'm talking about? Right, the earphone jack. There's nowhere to plug in a standard earphone jack or plug on your new iPhone. And this is, kind of taking people by surprise. Why are they doing that? And to kind of explain why they removed the iPhone jack or the headphone jack from the iPhone, they explain it in one word: courage. Now, I don't know if it actually takes courage to make some changes on a cell phone or not, but I do know that it takes courage. It took courage for this man, this teacher, this expert of the law, to say what he said to Jesus in front of everybody. Because he didn't hear what Jesus said, and he didn't hear the truth of what Jesus said, and he didn't hear the goodness of what Jesus said, and just kind of shuffle off in a huff and shaking his fist, "Oh, I'm going to get him one day." No, he didn't do that. He heard the truth of Christ's answer, and he said, "Yes, that's right. You have answered good. You have answered well. This is amazing. I mean, this is great." And he said that he affirmed Jesus' response there in public, in front of the Sadducees that Jesus had just been arguing with, in front of his peers, in front of his group of people that was so against Jesus. He affirmed what Jesus had to say in front of these other people that he was supposed to be on their side with. And instead, publicly, he said, Jesus has it right. That took courage. Because the words that he said, even there at the end, after he affirmed what Jesus said, was, how the scribe said, and this is more important than the sacrifices and the animals. And this is what we looked at last week. This was the whole point of what Jesus had done when he interrupted the temple services. And so the scribe, this enemy of Jesus, was affirming what Jesus had done even then by saying, "You're right. All of those sacrifices, all of those services in the temple, they are not nearly as important as loving God with all of your being and loving your neighbor as yourself." But Jesus doesn't stop there. Jesus saw in verse 34 that the man answered him wisely. So he said to him, You are close to God's kingdom. And after that, no one was brave enough to ask Jesus any more questions. See, Jesus had to kind of get the last word in here. He didn't quite say the words directly that this woman is saying there on the screen, but he kind of said it in an indirect way. Because this man, this scribe, I'm sure seems to be very, the right intentions. He tells Jesus, yes, Jesus, you have answered well, you have answered properly. Kind of keeping himself in the position of authority, as if this teacher of the law was in the position to judge what Christ, what God in the flesh had to say. But Jesus kind of turns it back around at the end there, and he says, no, you still don't quite get it. I am the authority here. I am the final arbiter of who is in the kingdom and who is out of the kingdom. And I know that you're close. I know that you're knocking on the door, but you haven't quite stepped through yet. You're near to the kingdom, but you haven't quite made it there yet. And this is our third and final remarkable point this morning, that to be in the kingdom, we cannot simply approve of Jesus' teachings. We must fully submit to him. To be in the kingdom, we cannot simply approve of what Jesus has to say. We have to submit to him and to his teaching. I mean, imagine being in the workplace and your boss explaining your new assignment. And you're like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense, boss. That's great. And then not going out and doing it. Right? You're not going to be employed for very long, right? You have to listen and to submit to your boss. Imagine being in the classroom and the teacher telling you that 1 times 2 is 2. And you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I get it. I understand. Good job, teacher. And then when the quiz comes, you write 1 times 2 is 3. Hopefully you don't expect to pass or to get that right. You have to see something. You have to understand the truth and then apply it and then submit to it. You can't just see a clock on the wall that says 5 o'clock and say, oh yeah, I know that it's 5 o'clock. I agree that it's 5 o'clock, and then go try to make your appointments like the clock said 4, right? You're going to be running late the whole day long. You can't just agree with something that's truth and then not live accordingly. And yet so many times there's people that read the teachings of Jesus in today's world and they say, oh yeah, Jesus really, I agree with so much. Most of what Jesus has to say, he hits the nail on the head over and over again. He's a good teacher. I get it. He gives great answers and great insight and great lessons. But you know what? I'm still going to just do my own thing. I'm going to go my own way. I'm going to figure it out on my own, even though I know that Jesus teaches really well. To be in the kingdom, not at the door, not on the porch, not walking down the sidewalk, but to be in the kingdom. We can't simply approve of Jesus' teachings. We have to submit. And this morning, this is what Jesus asks for us to do. He asks for us to do the same thing he asked of the Israelites 7,000 years ago. He asked the same thing of us that he asked the Jews 2,000 years ago. And that's to love God with all of our being. To love God with all of our heart and our soul and our mind and our strength. And to love our neighbor as ourselves. He says when we do that, then we are on that path. Then we are following him down that narrow path towards the kingdom of heaven. When we love God with all of who we are, when we love our neighbors, regardless of our differences, when we love them as we love ourselves, then we are showing the world that we are following in the footsteps of Christ, and that we are following him, and that we have accepted his invitation to follow him all the way to heaven. I want to follow him this morning. Do you?